Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of From Shauna's Desk. This is a subscriber requested pandemic pep talk, as I call them. I haven't done one of these for a while. I haven't actually done a video that's not a book chat for a while. I've been doing videos for the classes, but unless you're a student of one of the teachers that I support, then you haven't seen them. But I didn't come here to talk today about work. I came to talk about what it's been like for roughly the last 6 months, because today marks 6 months in isolation for us, and I actually escaped today. I just as soon would have stayed here. But as most of you know that are watching this, I live in a residential facility, and those of us that are here are at increased risk of infection if we are exposed to something. And so we've been practicing protective isolation since March. And the only time we can go out is for necessary medical care or follow up with our staff. And so I had to have a flu shot today. And that's how I got out. And I have to say that it was a bit of a freaky experience for me. I mean, I knew kind of what to expect, but it's a little bit of a surreal experience when you haven't been outside further than your driveway, and I'm not exaggerating, for 6 months. So I didn't see a lot of people on my way there. There were a few more in the pharmacy that I went to get my flu shot. There were a few more people there. Everyone was wearing masks and trying to practice social distancing in a small space as much as we could. But it was just an interesting experience, and I had some interesting thoughts that came into my head about how strange it was and how it felt like an old Twilight Zone movie, if you've ever seen the Twilight Zone from the 60s and the 70s. An old Rod Serling science fiction horror based television series. Look it up, called The Twilight Zone, if you don't know. But anyway, like most of us, I've been dealing with varying degrees of boredom and some depression and some just stir craziness. Who wouldn't be stir crazy after this period? But I wanted to touch on a few things because I was thinking about it, and if you've watched my other videos, you know that I have been a big proponent over the weeks of keeping on a routine and of trying to make sure that I'm being productive, and I think that's been a big help. So I wanted to kind of come here today and give you a few things that I'm doing that are helping me right now, because some of you may be out of quarantine or out of isolation before we are, honestly. And so even though, we can get out for necessary procedures or whatever, it's a very different experience to spend every day here at home, online, doing everything. So I just wanted to pass along a couple of tips. I should say that I know that some of you have very real and very apparent mental health diagnoses that are being treated by professionals. And for those of you who may be watching this who fit that category, um, I'm hoping that these strategies augment that, but I'm by no means suggesting that they're there to supplant that or that they're any better than any other. If you are in therapy, if you are taking medication, if you are doing some sort of mental health regimen with a professional, by all means continue that. Those things are there to assist you in living a more functional and meaningful quality of life. So do continue that. But many of us are not there or not on that extreme. And yet I know that there are people who have been dealing with more pronounced challenges than normal. And the first thing I want to say is, you know, when I got into this pandemic, like most of us, I was, you know, I wasn't voraciously watching the news, but I was conscientiously watching the news and watching the numbers tick up and listening to all the conflicting advice. And at some point, it just became counterproductive. It was starting to make me anxious, more anxious than I needed to be. And I made a decision then that I would partition my watching, partition my exposure. And it's not about not being informed and not understanding what the current guidelines are and where the current protocols are going for your job or your school or your workplace or whatever. But it's about consciously choosing to, just like you feed your body, you can feed your mind with junk or you can feed your mind good stuff. And just like most of us, when we start diets, usually on the 1st or the 2nd of January, we start with these great intentions. Oh, I'm going to do this. And we develop these grandiose plans of what we're going to do. And we fail maybe after 2 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 if we're fortunate. But I'd like to suggest a slightly different approach. And that is that we, myself included, conscientiously strive to add more of the good stuff to our mental diet. And by that I mean stuff that's uplifting to you. So it could be scriptures, it could be inspirational music, it could be meditation, it could be classical music, it could be reading philosophy. I'm just suggesting that we do something that's going to augment our mental health, to improve our mental health in that way. And the more that you focus on that, you have just a little bit less room for all the bad stuff. It's like if I tell you, okay, don't think about broccoli. When I said don't think about broccoli, what's the first thing you thought about? Broccoli, right? Because our minds don't recognize the word don't or not. They take it in intellectually, but it's not something that we place a lot of focus on. So when we say don't focus on it, we still create more of what we don't want. If I say don't think about broccoli, then guess what we get? More broccoli, even though we don't want to think about that. So if you don't want to think about broccoli, then shift the focus of your thought to ice cream or to carrots or to puppies or to some other focus. And there'll be just a little bit less room for broccoli. And if you do this repeatedly and you put your focus elsewhere, you begin to build a bigger focus on that other thing. And most of us have done that. I mean, I have done that. There's a situation, and some of you know this story in more detail than others, but when I came into this semester, I knew that I was going to support the calculus. Yeah. And most of you know what a struggle it was last semester for me to support the calculus after being in class for 8 weeks and then going online for another 6 weeks after 2 weeks of break and then 1 week of finals at the end. And over the course of the last 3 to 4 months, I've seen some subtle shifts in my thoughts about my ability to do calculus. Now, I'm not in, by any stretch of the imagination, as articulate as I would like to be about understanding the procedures of what calculus is all about and understanding the proofs and why we need to do certain things that we do. But in some ways, I'm much less intimidated by it than I was before. And part of that is engagement. Part of that is facing the block that I had developed. But part of that is practice, which practice doesn't intimidate me. It never really has. People who put a timeline on it sometimes do when learn this by Tuesday. But excuse me, but it's a different story if you have to explain it and teach it. And I've noticed a shift in my thoughts. So that's the first thing I would say is recognize that your thoughts are a pattern. Your eating is a pattern, your thoughts are a pattern. And those patterns come from different things. They come from sometimes bad situations in our childhood. They might come from something as bad as abuse or neglect, or they might just come from regular, normal living. I mean, I had a pretty challenging childhood in some ways, but my family tried its best to be stable. I lived with a man who was chronically ill and very ill most of my life and died when I was a teenager. And my mom was the one who, quote, wore the pants in the family. So, you know, she was the breadwinner, and that was not necessarily the thing to be doing in the 70s, but that was how my life went. And looking back on a lot of it, you know, almost 50 years later, I can see how some parts of it were not very conducive and not very good. But then I can't place blame on anybody because I can truthfully say that my family did everything that they knew to do. And I honor them for that. But you do develop patterns. And so I've taken recently to really thinking about this idea of a pattern and how to shift a pattern, not by brute force, because a lot of times brute force, willpower, striving doesn't work. And it doesn't work for a lot of reasons. I believe that these problems have spiritual causes and they need spiritual answers, but we didn't come to talk about that necessarily. But I want you to think about the patterns. I mentioned in one of my other videos that one of the things I tend not to do is get up and look at the COVID numbers first thing in the morning. It's not the first thing that I want to look at. I mean, there are days when I do, but it's not something that I do repeatedly just because it's not something that I want to fill my mind with. Um, I'd rather fill my mind with something else, even if it's a mindless app or a game on my phone. But usually I try to listen to a song, or sometimes I listen to a song or I read something else. I try to do something that's going to set my tone for the day. So, what are my takeaways? Your thoughts that are causing you to be depressed or stir crazy about this pandemic and whatever situation you're in are a pattern. It's useless to try and break the pattern by brute force, but it might be more practical to change the pattern by adding good stuff into your mental diet rather than trying to sort of break your mental diet apart and shove everything in there all at once. Just keep adding the good, and eventually you'll have more focus on that. And maybe it will shift you enough to make some different decisions about where you are and about what you want to do. And the other thing I would say is if you need to take some time away from social media, away from your job, away from your screen, do it. This situation, even though it seems like it's going to linger forever, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it linger for another 6 months to a year, honestly, for some people. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't pretend to be prescient in that realm. I just think that you need to do what's best for you and recognize that this is a temporary thing. So if you decide to make a decision because you have kids at home and your kids need you and you just can't balance everything right now, then do that. Because at the end of the day, the only person you have to live with is you. And it's between, as the saying goes, it's between you and God and the fence post. And nobody really can judge you for that. So I hope that you got a takeaway from this, and I hope that you'll do some things over the next week, the next few days, the next few weeks to consciously change your pattern. What do you want to think about? Okay, so you don't want to think about sitting on the couch aimlessly eating cheese puffs all day. What do you want to do instead? What do you want to think about instead? You're depressed because this feels like it's never going to end. So what are you going to do about that? I've talked in my previous videos about some of the challenges that I set for myself. One of them being to read a book a week during quarantine, and I'm somewhat torn right now whether I should continue that. I've done it. I have a book up for this week, or I will after the video goes up today. But I technically I'm not in isolation anymore. I mean, I am, but I went out, so I don't know if that means we reset from zero or I call it something different from now on, but I guess it doesn't really matter in the final analysis all that much. I talked about trying to learn new things, and I've done that. You can do those things if you decide to do those things. If you have the capacity to do that, you can do that. And you don't have to start with a huge amount. If you want to read a book and you can't read a book a week, read a page a day. Read 5 minutes a day. Start with 5 minutes, then go to 10. Do something that's so manageable that you can't not do it. If you want to work out 3 times a week, start with 1 minute. Do something for 1 minute. Do run in place for 1 minute, which in this heat would probably burn you about 30 calories. But that's my point. Just create something different. Create a change for yourself. And if you are in difficulty, if you are in a mental health crisis, there are resources out there. There are places to go and get help. So don't not use that. They're there, and they're staffed by competent people, and there is a provision. But it's all about living the best quality of life while you're here so that you can express the authentic person that you are called to be. Whatever you're doing today and wherever you are, I hope that you're well. I hope that you've gotten something out of this video. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I will talk to you, Lord willing, very soon. Be well and stay healthy, everyone. Talk to you later. Bye for now.